All right, here we go. Hi, my name is Ben, and welcome to the NPC Sports Podcast. We are today one man shorter, but probably one better by eliminating some of the riffraff. Dakota, how are you?
I'm great. I'm great. I think we're better for it not having Logan in the mix today. I think we both can agree.
Precisely. All right, no pleasantries needed. Let's just hop right in. Patriots draft. There was a lot of fans who were upset going into the end of the season. They won that game against the Buffalo Bills. Cost them presumably the number one pick in the draft. They'll now be picking at number 4. You've obviously been around the team a good amount in recent history. What's your take on their draft position right now going into the real meat of the pre-draft coverage? And do you think that there is a big difference with them being at number 4 versus higher in this draft?
Well, I think it's tough to say because we ultimately don't know what the Tennessee Titans are going to do with the first pick. Um, it would obviously be better for the Patriots to be in that spot where if they really want someone like Abdul Carter, that would make it easier for them to get him. But outside of that, if they're looking at offensive tackle, they're going to, the best one's going to be available there at number 4. If they're looking for the best receiver, Ted McMillan, he's probably going to be available there at number 4. If they want the best tight end, Jacob Bourne, he'll be available there at number 4. Likely the same case with Mason Graham, the defensive tackle out of Michigan. Travis Hunter's kind of a different deal. I don't even think he makes sense for the Patriots. I don't think they're in a position to manage that kind of unique prospect and deciding whether he's a corner or a receiver. I think they need more sure bets at positions like offensive tackle and in the front 7. But, for me, I think, and I was thinking about this yesterday, I think that already the draft coverage has shifted where, I've seen a ton of mock drafts already, and none of them have a quarterback going first overall, even though I think we all agree that Will Levis stinks. And I think it's just the general consensus is that neither of these guys, Shador Sanders or Cam Ward, are true top quarterback prospects. Most experts say that, if this were last year, both of these guys would have gone after the top 6, which means after Bo Nix. And so, it was very easy for people to get caught up in the hoopla of the regular season finale when the Patriots won a meaningless game and dropped from the number 1 pick to the 4th pick. And sure, again, it'd be better to be in the number 1 pick, and I'm sure they could have gotten a decent trade for good assets. But I think it's become abundantly clear that no one in that number 1 pick is going to get some insane draft haul this year. No one is tripping over themselves to trade up for Cam Ward or Shador Sanders. A lot of mock drafts have Sanders going all the way down at number 7 to the Jets. So yeah, could the Patriots have acquired decent assets? Maybe a later first round or future first or a second or a third, sure. But they have the ammo to do that anyway if they want. The difference between 1 and 4 in this draft basically is nothing. Not nothing, but it's much slimmer than in past years. And they have that Judon pick or the pick from the Judon trade, a 3rd rounder. I think Joe Milton could be a trade asset as good as a 2nd or a 3rd round pick this year. If you're a team that wants to add a young quarterback this year, would you rather get one of these super fringy prospects in the 2nd or 3rd round in a bad quarterback draft, or would you rather get trade your 2nd or 3rd round pick for Joe Milton? I think that's an easy call. So I still think the Patriots have more than enough ammo to get where they want on the draft board if there's someone that they really want. And I just think it's another lesson in not speaking or speculating in such absolutes around things like draft position and tanking or schedule releases or offseason additions when everyone has I remember a few years ago, Broncos got Russell Wilson, Raiders got Devontae Adams, Colts got Matt Ryan, and everybody had all of those teams, ahead of the Patriots. And I think all of them finished below the Patriots in the standings. So none of us know anything. A lot of these takes usually age poorly. And when it comes to the draft and tanking, more often than not, just play it out. If you're a quarterback needy team and there's a true generational prospect, that's a different conversation. But most of the time, that's not the case. And so I just hope people remember this moving forward when there's all this obsession over losing games at the end of the season for the sake of going up a few more picks.
So then let me ask you, in your opinion, does staying at number 4 make sense, or does it make more sense to move off? Because I agree with you. I think that they are in kind of a position where they need kind of everything besides quarterback. And the names that are predicted to be off the board ahead of them are those guys that I would classify as like athletes. So I think at number 4, I know a lot of people coming off the Super Bowl. There's a lot of talk about interior line, front 4. Their need, one of their biggest needs is obviously the offensive line. But like you mentioned, Abdul Carter. I think that they have to be thinking just who's the most impactful potential player at that spot. And I do think that an edge rusher is somebody that you can kind of put in and say, okay, this guy can have an impact for us. And is it like the things that we've highlighted as like our top need or like our top 2 needs? No, but it's way up there. And an outside linebacker or even a defensive, it's probably a little high from Michael Williams. But even somebody like that, just somebody who can get after the quarterback, might be best if you don't feel that any of those offensive linemen are really worth the reach there at 4.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it comes down to things we don't quite know yet, right? Like, for instance, do they think, Dietrich Wise is a free agent. He's also 31. Like, I don't think he's anyone you're thinking about necessarily for the future. But Keon White, like, do they think he is their long-term answer on the defensive end? I think so, but how does Mike Vrabel feel about him, right? It's not his guy. What do they know about Christian Barmore's health? Like, are they not concerned about it? In which case, like, you have that interior disruptive defensive tackle that every team wants right now. But are they really concerned about it? In which case, do you go after a Mason Graham? How do they feel about Will Campbell, whether he's a guard or a tackle? This is one of those things where, one of the big stories at the Combine will be how long are Will Campbell's arms, one of these absurd Combine storylines. But for him, it might make all the difference where when you saw in the Super Bowl, Joe Tooney, short arms. There's a reason he's not a tackle and why he's a guard. And he ultimately got exposed playing left tackle in the Super Bowl. Like, as fun as it is to poke fun at the arm length thing, it does matter a lot of the time unless the prospect is elite in all the other areas. So how do they feel about Will Campbell, right? And so the answers to those questions ultimately will decide what they do. But at the end of the day, one of Will Campbell, Mason Graham, Abdul Carter, Travis Hunter, Ted McMillan, like one of those guys is going to be available at number 4. So I think they're good regardless. But I also think, if they don't love taking someone like Will Campbell at number 4, the teams after them in the draft order probably aren't going to identify Will Campbell as like their immediate needs. So the Patriots could trade down to like 7 or 8. And so I think, I do think trading back is probably something that I would look at, because I think this is a down draft. And when you're talking about picks like 4 through 12, if you're ranking them in tiers, they're all really in the same tier. And as you said, the Patriots have a bunch of different needs. So I'm not sure they necessarily need to prioritize one or the other. So if I were them, I would be definitely looking at moving down into like the 7 to 9 range. But they have to be confident that one of the top few players on their board is going to be available there.
So kind of a philosophical question. What is your take on guys that are coming into a professional draft as athletes, that they're kind of banking on their athleticism? Travis Hunter is the a number 1 example there, but I also kind of put Shadur Sanders in that bucket, because I feel like Shadur Sanders, just because like his dad is the coach, he ended up as a quarterback, but I kind of I didn't watch him play a whole lot, but just when I did watch him play, his arm was not outstanding. So for all of his athletic skills, there is kind of part of me that was like, okay, like he could be a very very good NFL quarterback, but is he like a number 2 pick NFL quarterback? And could he have been one of these many college quarterbacks that end up being very good NFL wide receivers? just off of his football IQ and his athleticism. So I'm just curious what you see when you see these guys coming in and they're classified as athlete.
Well, like for me, if I'm just targeting traits and like I'm looking at a guy like freak athlete, I think those are the kind of swings you take later in the draft. And at times when you sort of ignore maybe even off-field concerns like Javon Baker in the 4th round for the Patriots last year, or taking a swing on someone like Pop Douglas in the 6th round, where he's super undersized, but he's so quick and he's so athletic. But if you're targeting somebody who's maybe athlete first, early in the draft, I mean, you got to be sure that number one, the coaching is good enough, and that he's a good scheme fit. Like Keon White is a good example where good athlete, but his size is weird, right? He's too tall to be an outside linebacker, and he's too small to be a defensive end. So number one, you got to sort of figure out how is he going to fit into your scheme, and number two, you got to like believe for sure that you have the coaches that are going to get the best out of him. Nakobe Dean, right? Like that's a guy who slipped down a lot of boards, but he was a really athletic player, undersized, but really athletic. And the Eagles looked at him and said, we're confident that we have, the coaching infrastructure to get the most out of him. So just for me, and Christian Gonzalez too, right? Christian Gonzalez is a guy who a lot of his game film, like some of it was great, but a lot of the film against better teams wasn't really great. And there were a lot of questions about his intensity. Or his just general makeup, and that was someone who really it was like his athleticism. He was freakish athleticism, freakish height for the position. And as bad as the Patriots are, with their coaching, the first year he was under Bill Belichick, in both years he was under Mike Pellegrino, who is probably has been one of the better assistant coaches for the Patriots in recent years. So he got good coaching at the position. But yeah, if you're getting a guy who his athleticism probably is currently ahead of his like actual football abilities, then I think you just have to be 100% confident in your coaching and the scheme fit.
And is that coaching there for the Patriots now?
I mean, on the defensive side of the ball, I think certainly, right? I think Mike Vrabel, this track record speaks for itself and what he was able to get out of some of the talent on those Tennessee Titans teams. I mean, who knows about Terrell Williams, right? Like, I'm not going to sit here and act like I know anything about him. I know he spent time with Vrabel, and he seemed to do a really good job with the Detroit Lions last year. You wonder how much of that was him as the defensive line coach, how much of that was Aaron Glenn as the defensive coordinator. Who really knows? But I think I think Vrabel's work in Tennessee speaks for itself. On the offensive side of the ball, we went over this in a previous episode where I think we're all really confident in Josh McDaniels, especially as a quarterback mentor, but as a scheme fit, it's hard to know where his scheme is right now, whether it's leans more towards what he did with the Patriots, whether he's truly adopted a lot of other styles and made sort of this hodgepodge that we talked about before. And then they just have to know, how difficult is it, right? That was always a huge thing in past years was, is the entry point too high, too difficult to understand for a lot of these young players? Has he simplified it? And can some of these younger prospects figure it out more quickly than they did in the past? I think that one is a legitimate concern. But again, I don't think it doesn't seem really like they're going to be targeting offensive players unless it's a tackle that early in the draft. It's probably going to be a defensive player if it's not a tackle. And then, so from that perspective, I think Patriots fans should feel great about Vrabel identifying those players and getting the most out of them.
All right. Well, speaking of figuring things out, I want to take us to baseball now. Spring training has begun, and this is the first trial run of an automatic balls and strikes system. It is a challenge system for at least this portion of the test. Teams get 2 challenges, and only the pitcher, catcher, and batter are allowed to challenge a pitch immediately after the call. And then they go to the ABS system, and if the call is overturned, if the challenge is supported, then they keep that. If their challenge is unsuccessful, they lose one of their challenges. We've seen it used, a fair amount of time so far. Occasionally to kind of amusing degree. Everyone saw the video from the Rays game that was shared around social media where they challenged a pitch that missed by about 8 inches high. I guess I'll ask what was kind of your expectation when you heard that this was going to be tested, and what do you think now that you've seen it in action for a few days?
Well, I've also seen it in action in the minors. And I love it personally. Um, I wouldn't be opposed at all as long as they're comfortable with it. By rolling with it this season, I think it is one of those rules where if they wanted to, they could just flip the switch and have it ready to go for the regular season. I would want the ballparks to do a good job of explaining what it is for the fans, right? Like, is there a counter up on the scoreboard that has two challenge lights, right? Or make sure that it's everyone understands what's going on, because I think one of the biggest issues in recent years has been like the umpires going through all this deliberation and the fans having no idea what's going on. So I think they have to have all those ducks in a row, but I love it. I think it's the perfect sort of middle ground for this whole thing. I think many people don't just want fully robotic umpires. I think it's easy to focus on eliminating the really bad calls and key scenarios that change a game, and those absolutely have to be fixed. But you know, there's the human umpires have a role beyond just calling the balls and strikes. Like in those moments, like they have to, they massage the strike zone. They expand it when necessary. Like as an extreme example, you know, blowout game, 13-2, position players in the game in the seventh inning. Do we really need the robot squeezing, you know, Justinson Garcia trying to throw the ball over the plate in the seventh inning? Like, I just don't, So there are a lot of, and that's an extreme case, but there are other ones throughout the game where, I just think you need the human presence to massage the strike zone. I also personally, I think, there are other human elements where, a pitcher recognizes that an umpire has a certain strike zone and he pitches to it. If every pitcher is just sort of, you know, pitching to exactly what the robot strike zone is, then the pitchers themselves kind of become robots. And you've removed all kinds of other human elements from the game that I think are interesting. You know, I think having a challenge system is the perfect spot for this. It'll add strategy. Do you burn one early in the game, or do you hold it off to the end? But I will say the one thing I worry about is the slippery slope, where if a team burns their challenges earlier in the game and then we get to the ninth and there's a bad call, and it's like, okay, well, clearly we need to expand this, and then maybe that's a booth review, and then it becomes, well, how often do you do the booth review, and before you know it, you truly are just you know using robots to determine every single ball and strike. So it is in all the other sports we've seen. Once you introduce and expand instant replay, it's kind of like a Pandora's box, and so I fear the same thing happening in baseball. But if it can somehow just stay to this system, I think it's the perfect way to do it.
I'd love to see the douchey catcher who it's an 18-5 game, and he challenges on the David Hamilton ephus pitch. Yeah. I have a lot of opinions on this. I think, by and large, I don't like replay. But I realize I'm in a minority of maybe only a handful of people. Most people, what's that?
I know, I'm with you on that. I'm not a replay person.
Yeah, I mean, most people say, well, the most important thing is to get the call right. I've for most of my early life, whether the call was right or not, it was, you had to roll with it one way or the other. That's what, those of us who have not played professionally, that's what we always had to do. If the call is bad, you roll with it and you move on. But I realize, especially when it comes to professional sports, when there's millions on the line, you can't really do that. I do worry a little bit about it becoming too much like the NBA or the NFL, where, when I watch an NFL game now and there's a touchdown, I don't go, yeah, touchdown. I look and I'm like, okay, is there a challenge flag? No, let's watch the replay. Okay, let's bring in Mike Pereira. He thinks it's good. Are we going to go to a challenge because it's the fourth quarter? No. All right, let's get, and then okay, now we're going to commercial, and now I can be like, okay, cool, that thing counted. The NBA is even worse. Like the NBA, there's a play, and then sometimes, like, if they don't do the real time challenge, they come back like 5 minutes later and they're like, oh, actually that 3-pointer was a 2-pointer, so this score is different. Or they go, oh, we'll go to the replay, see if there was a phantom foul. And for me, it's just like totally sucked the excitement out of those moments. And so I that's the thing that sinks, is there will be that moment in a big league game where, you know, it'll be a clutch moment, 3-2 pitch, guy dots the outside corner, strike 3. You're like, yeah. And then they're like, oh no, we're going up top. And they're like, okay, well, now I need to wait, you know, for 2 minutes to find out whether my excitement was warranted.
Yeah, and then you have, like in freaking Celtics games, where you have Scal saying green light special going into the break, and then the Red Sox, it'll be Monaco or Will Miller-Brooks going red light special going into the commercial break. So yeah, I'm with you, and I'm of the belief that, like, I know people love complaining about refs and love, you know, leaning into conspiracies and gambling and some of that stuff. I think there are real concerns, but I think by and large, officiating in all 4 leagues is better than it's ever been. It's just our replays and our TVs and our, you know, all this stuff is so much better than it's ever been, that you see everything. And so I just, you know, I don't think the officiating is that bad, but it's just, I think we're at a point of no return. Like, I don't think the toothpaste can go back in. Like, I'm like you, I remember growing up and you just kind of brushed it off when there was a bad call, whether you were playing or watching. I don't think society is ever going to get back to that mindset of just letting it go. I think we're too far gone as a species that I just don't see it happening. But I think I just worry that it's easy to focus on, put all the emphasis on thinking about, you know, fixing the bad calls in the big spots. But like, there's so much other human stuff attached to balls and strikes that make baseball an interesting sport. You know, the pitcher getting mad at the ump, the manager yelling at the ump, you know, the hitter getting upset, or like I said earlier, the pitcher sort of like reacting to the expanding or shrinking zone and adjusting their game, which is all part of being a good pitcher. Like, there's all these sort of branch off human elements that all get removed if you just automate all balls and strikes. And, you know, maybe we can have a conversation whether it's ultimately a good thing because you fix the calls, but it's just eventually you're left with something little more than a simulation, which isn't fun.
I've got 2 little kind of wiggles with it. So the first one is very small. I would prefer if even pitchers didn't have the ability to challenge, because no offense to pitchers, but they're pitchers. They're babies about a lot of stuff, and their grasp of the strike zone, you can just tell by watching games, a lot of times is not very good. In fact, sometimes it can be pretty bad. So, you know, maybe if you are a pitcher and you want to have like a signal with your catcher, you know, that you can be like, hey, I want to challenge that. And then your catcher has to be the one who ultimately requests it, because a lot of time the catcher will be like, no, man, like, you might have thought, but come on, dude, no. So that's kind of like a little, you know, niggle I have with it. Big picture. This is a change to the rules of what a strike and a ball is. And I think that a lot of people are not grasping that. So 1 second. Because, you know, I was just trying to look up the exact wording of the MLB strike zone. I looked it up last night. My iPad's not cooperating at the moment. But basically, the MLB strike zone, and the way it's worded similarly across every level, you know, Little League, Babe Ruth, everything, is if the ball crosses, if the ball gets, you know, somewhere between the midpoint of the chest and the knees and crosses any part of the plate, which means that the strike zone is 3-dimensional. It's not a flat plane. So, you know, we see the box on TV and we think of it as just, well, it crosses the plate within this box. It's a, what's that called? Trapezoidal shape, because the plate is like that little house shape, upside down house shape. And I think that gets lost a lot, because, you know, the measurement, so apparently the pitch tracks that you see on TV is taken from the front of the plate. but the ABS system is calibrated to somewhere in the middle of the plate. So, it might seem like a little thing, but that's a fairly sizable amount. And so if you're like a sinker ball pitcher, let's say, you can have a ball that comes in and nicks the bottom of the strike zone, but then drops below where the ABS plane says a strike is. On the flip side, like, I know we all laughed at that high changeup that was high, but from watching it, I can't say necessarily that maybe that changeup did come in and it was high at the ABS, but maybe it dropped down to where if we were talking about a truly three-dimensional plate, it could have nicked the plate. And, with the human umpires, maybe they're, not maybe, but like they're definitely not making all those calculations in their brain. But this does change the rules of a strike zone. It does change it for at least 2 pitches per game from being a 3-dimensional strike zone to determining what a ball and strike is to being a 2-dimensional plane determining what a ball and strike is. And I think that does matter.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't know that. But and on top of that, I think the TV strike zone is not nearly as accurate as people think it is.
Oh, it's terrible. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like I think everyone sort of lives and dies by it, and then you have those calls where there's the little bit of space between the ball and the line, and everyone gets upset about it. But like if the thing is even a little bit inaccurate, all of a sudden the ball actually nicks the edge, and in those situations we're all like, yep, you got it. And so it's like I think people live and die by that thing on the TV screen too much. But yeah, I didn't know that about the actual wording of a rule of balls and strikes. I never thought about that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting. And I guess to the point, yeah, you start like over defining and drawing too many lines on these things. And where does it stop? I don't. Like I said earlier, I fear the slippery slope of like, over defining and over outlining all these different parts of the game instead of just like letting the humans decide it. But I don't know.
I'll be curious to find out like specifically which players truly have the best grasp of the strike zone, because I know like catchers are used to framing. They have a general idea of what the strike zone is, and the way that they frame usually doesn't change too much from batter to batter. So now that it's a computerized system that's changing from batter to batter, whereas you once framed that thing at a certain height above the ground, and assumed, hey, this is a strike. It's like, well, it might have been a strike on the last guy who's 5'6", but it's not necessarily a strike now on the guy who's 6'2". So that might be good or bad for like Aaron Judge, because now he'll have a true strike zone. But we'll find out who actually gets what the real strike zone is, or what they pictured what the strike zone was in their minds.
Well, that'll be interesting too for catchers, because framing is one of these sort of advanced analytics that's really taken off in the past decade or so, and is like a real big measurement for how teams assess catchers. And I mean, if I remember it right, I think that was one of Christian Vasquez's weak points, was he was not considered a very good framer. I mean, he had a good arm, but a lot of people said he's not a great defensive catcher because he's bad at framing. Whereas, well, now does that matter? If there's no frame, if the framing doesn't matter, maybe Christian Vasquez still is your franchise catcher. I don't know.
Have we just made Martin Maldonado obsolete?
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's a good point. Yeah, he doesn't have a job.
Yeah, because he ain't in there to hit 160 anymore.
Yeah. So speaking of catchers, I don't know if you saw Kyle Teal hit a bomb off of rookie Sasaki yesterday.
Yeah. I am most interested to see who is the first and best person that figures out a way to take advantage of this. Like who will be, whether, maybe like who will be the pitcher who figures out the ABS equivalent of the tush push, where like, it's like they figure out like a way to exploit something that's like not illegal yet. But like, I think it will be interesting to see which team or which pitcher figures that out first.
It's going to be like when you're growing up and you put the chair behind the plate for wiffle ball.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you knew anybody that was good enough to do the curveball that wrapped around your back and still nick the corner of the chair. Who's going to be the one to figure that out?
Yeah, right. Or even like who's the one that figures out, if you wear I don't know, you wear a certain like chain or something, it screws with the laser. I don't know, something.
Someone's going to figure out how to cheat it. You're right.
Yeah,
Like, yeah,
put a jamming device in your back pocket, and it's so. Anyway, Robo Umps, the wave of the future.
Do you, before we move on to the next segment, do you want to rope in a quick, pretty relevant Patriots news thing?
Oh, do we have breaking news? I don't have a breaking news drop.
It's not breaking news, but
okay.
It's that they just dropped that annual NFLPA report card that you've probably heard about the last few years, where the Patriots have finished near dead last like the last 2 years in a row. They always drop it during the combine, and it just came out, and it's not any better for the Patriots. I mean, I'll just rip through it real quick. They finished 31st out of 32 teams. I think that's the same as last year. They went ranked second to last. They're ranked second to last overall and no higher than 18th in any individual category. I'll just go through their categories real quick. Treatment of families, 18th for a C+. I do think that's up from last year where they were near the bottom. Food dining area, 24th. Nutritionist dietitian, 25th. Locker room, 22nd. Training room, 30th, as it's been since this report card started coming out. Training staff, 26th, and yet we're still keeping Duron Mayo on staff. Weight room, 32nd. It is that bad. Strength coaches, 26th. Team travel, 31st. And again, I think people focus on the aircrafts, the planes, and wonder how the hell that can happen. It's not about that per se. It's about how good are your accommodations in the hotels? Do you make guys share rooms, all this kind of stuff. It's not really about the planes. Head coach, 24th. I'd be curious to dive in and see if that's Vrabel or no, that must be Mayo because this was conducted during the season. Ownership, 29th. It's not good for Robert Kraft. And then quickly on the blurb, there's a short blurb that they accompanied the Patriots in it. So the Patriots ranked 31st overall this season, but there are signs of progress following last year's report. Owner Robert Kraft announced $50 million investment in a new adjacent facility. It's being built near the practice field. It's supposed to be like multiple levels. That's where the new media workroom will be. So that could be pretty cool. After receiving an F- last year for the treatment of players' families, the team made immediate improvements, including hiring a staff manager to manage family services and adding a family room and daycare during games. These changes were well received. However, key facility issues remain, including the need to renovate the building, a cramped weight room, and outdated locker rooms. It is anticipated that those issues will be fixed when the new facility opens. Additionally, this is the last part, the team travels remain a significant concern. Only 39% of players feel they have comfortable amount of space on flights, so the flights are part of it, when traveling to games. The plane is dated, it lacks Wi-Fi, and still has ashtrays in the seats. I just said all that about the plane, and then I mean, I do know that it is about more than a plane, but it sounds like the plane was a big part of their bad grade. So
this always surprises me so much because everything that we hear about Robert Kraft suggests to me a guy who, above all else, wants to be liked. I mean, he's never struck me as one of these owners who, and I don't know if this is true of them, but like, there's owners like the Haslams or the Pagulas who just from outside appearances don't seem like they really care about whether their players like them. But Robert Kraft has always struck me as a guy who like really he's a fan. He wants his players to like him. Not Jonathan so much, but Robert. So it always has surprised me. And I think that this is one of those things where, I think it probably hurts him the way that it does not hurt Clark Hunt. You know what I mean? That the Chiefs are ranked, because Clark Hunt, I don't think, gives a damn about whether anybody likes him. But this has just got to kill Robert Kraft.
Yeah, and I think it's twofold, right? Like I think the first edition of this came out 2 or 3 years ago, and so we're talking post Brady. Patriots aren't good anymore. It's a lot easier for players to complain about this kind of stuff. and a lot of there aren't many holdovers from the Patriots dynasty, so you have a lot of guys that are they're signing or drafting, they're signing from other teams, or they're drafting from elite college programs that have all these crazy facilities, and they come to the Patriots, and yeah, they're pretty dated, and it's a lot harder to excuse it when you suck. On top of that, Robert Kraft doesn't spend a lot of cash, right? Like they've been down to the bottom of the cash spending rankings. And it seems like he really spreads out the big splurges. You have all that money on Patriots place, then not much for a while, and then you have the big spending spree in free agency, not much sense. They just did the big renovation of the stadium, and I'm sure they didn't want to build this new training facility this soon. I know that Belichick had sort of appointed this as Matt Patricia's big project when he had that nebulous job title a few years back. I forget what it was, but no one knew what the hell it meant. I know
the
part of
rocket
that
launching pad. That's what
yeah,
he was in charge of, Mr. NASA. Yeah.
yeah, and a lot of it was him sort of figuring out a new training facility setup. I don't know how big it was going to be, but now we're here, and it's I think that new training facility that they're building is a direct result of these reports, which is a good thing. That's why they do them. So yeah, on the one hand, it is surprising that Robert Kraft let it go this far. I wonder if it's just he was ignorant to it because they were winning and he just didn't think about it much. But now he can't really run from it, and it probably is impacting the Patriots' ability to lure top talent, especially when they're bad. So he can't run from it anymore. So the good news is he seems to be taking it seriously now, but it certainly was stuff that he neglected for so long. And it's easy for him probably to be like, well, I just let Bill handle all of it. He said all the stuff was fine. But it's his job to, sort of find out the actual truth. And obviously he didn't for a long time.
That was a good aside. Thanks for interrupting the flow of the show for that. Because talking about attracting the top talent segues into talking about our Behind the Keyboard segment, which is, today about the top talent getting recruited to the professional ranks. All the top talent is obviously heads to Indianapolis before every draft for the dog and pony show that is the NFL Combine. You've covered it. And I'm just kind of curious, we can all watch it on NFL Network and see the dash times and the shuttle drills and all that sort of stuff. What is that actually like to cover on location?
Weird is what I would say. Number one, I don't think a lot of fans probably realize, but the reporters can't go into the stadium and watch the drills. The TV crews can, or some of the TV crews, but like I certainly didn't have access. I even tried to go up one time, and because I'd never been in Lucas Oil Stadium, and I just wanted to check it out, and it was when the combine stuff was going on, and I wasn't allowed to. So like the average writer that goes there can't go in and watch the drills. Really, what the combine is, when I was there, it was a little different where I was in a unique position to actually get something out of it from a content standpoint, because Nesson's model was so high volume driven, and like there was a way to get a story out of just about everything. So like I went there and I squeezed like 40 something stories out of it. I remember going to talk to, all the prospects come out in positional groups, and I remember going over into the far corner of the room and seeing Puka Nacua, who I'd never heard of, but I just was trying to go up to every prospect and ask, have you met with the Patriots? Which is a completely useless factoid. Like, it doesn't matter that they've met or haven't met with the team, but you do it anyway. It's like this weird thing we all agree is dumb, but we do it anyway for the sake of content. But I remember asking Puka Nacua, and he was like, yeah, I met with him at the Senior Bowl. Then I met with him afterward. I met with him here. And he was like, sure, talking like someone who thought he was going to go there. Said he really loves playing in the cold and he would love playing up there. So obviously the Patriots blew it on that one. But yeah, like I was able to actually get a lot out of it because I just asked really simple questions that led to short stories that trafficked well. But for people that aren't doing that, and most people aren't doing that, you really don't do anything. You go into this room every day, and either the GMs come out, or the head coaches, or all the prospects, and most of them don't say anything. You're not getting any valuable information. Again, it doesn't matter that they met with the team, and most people realize that. So the actual, like, that part of it is completely useless for the most part. The true value of the combine, and the real reason why everybody goes, is to get absolutely shit-faced with the top people in the NFL. Like the whole point is you go to Indianapolis for the week and you go, the main bar is in the bottom of this JW Marriott called High Velocity. And you're just getting completely bombed with head coaches, general managers, you know, I'm not going to name names, top NFL insiders, agents, all this stuff. Like you're at the bar and you've got Schefter to your right, you've got, you know, Joe Judge to your left, you've got this agent over here, and it's bizarre. You're in any, and the weird thing is too, there's no security. Like an average person could walk off the street and walk into that bar and just join in. And for some reason that doesn't happen. I don't know why. But yeah, you see a lot of weird stuff there. You see a lot of people who you're used to seeing in very professional contexts get pretty wasted. I remember waiting for an Uber outside. I'm not going to name the head coach who it was, but there was an NFL head coach waiting for an Uber with two ladies under his arm and a cigarette in his mouth, completely bombed. And I'm like, holy crap! Like it's a bizarre thing. And yeah, the whole idea is to get drinks and buy someone a drink and see who will say something to you once they let loose a little bit. Like that's the whole point. And stay up till 3 a.m. and do it all the next day. Like that's all it is. That's the most benefit that you get out of it, and that's where you get sourced information if you're going to get any of it.
How much actual draft decision making is changed there, do you think?
Definitely less and less, especially now. And that's the other thing is like from a content perspective, it's become even less useful because a lot of these guys aren't actually participating. Like the quarterbacks aren't throwing; they just do the pro day, and you know these teams are doing so much homework on these guys throughout the college season. And then they go check them out at the Senior Bowl or the Shrine Bowl, or they go to their pro days where a lot of teams prefer the pro days. Really, the only thing that really changes, or the biggest benefit, is the interviews. But again, like a lot of them have already interviewed these guys at the Senior Bowl and stuff. So a lot of times this is the second or third interview, like I said with Puka Nacua. So yeah, like if a guy has a great interview, yeah, that can help his draft stock with a team. If he bombs it, that can obviously hurt it. But that's really it. That and little specific situations like, is Ted McMillan gonna run lower than a 4.5, and what does that do to his draft stock? What are Will Campbell's? What's his arm length? Just those specific scenarios. The rest of it, I think most teams they've done their homework. They're planning to go to the pro days, and really this is for them also about schmoozing and planning trade seeds with other head coaches and general managers, talking to agents about, the internal free agents or the external free agents coming up. It's as much about that for them as it is for the reporters. I think the on-field work is kind of secondary.
Right. So, I've never had the pleasure or the intoxication of covering the combine.
Indianapolis is super underrated.
Yeah, I've heard that, especially from a football perspective. I hear it has a nice complex.
It's all densely packed downtown, and then you got the Speedway that's not too far away, and the Pacers Arena is right there in the downtown. It's just like a very dense area of good restaurants, good bars, the football field, the basketball arena, and then you have the NCAA headquarters that are right there nearby in the museum. Very walkable city, so it's not like amazing. I'm not going to say like you got to go to Indy, but like it's better than some other cities for sure.
It's a good Chamber of Commerce speech for mayor of Indianapolis. What I did do though, I think just maybe a bit longer than you did was cover high school athletics. And so I can kind of offer I similar to the combine. I think that the element of high school athletes being scouted and recruited is also different from what a lot of people assume it is. I would cover athletes who, I would write that they're, multiple scouts at games or multiple college coaches. And I think a lot of people had this idea, like, if you see in movies with players getting scouted, this like people lining, the teams, they've got their guns out. They've got it. It's all decked out. And there was once player who was getting recruited, and a TV crew came, a news crew came, And they were like, well, where are all the scouts? I thought there'd be scouts. And I'm like, yeah, they are. It's like those two guys over there in Windbreakers. Like they're not. I think like that movie, The Trouble with the Curve. Have you ever seen that? That Clint Eastwood movie. Not a great
Once, yeah.
movie. Not
No.
not a great movie, but I thought that it did the best job of any movie I've seen of capturing the fact that like the people who are going around, scouting out high school athletes, they're not necessarily what you think of as like sports executives. These are guys in bomber jackets, and a lot of them are they probably have like iPads and stuff now, but as recently as just like 10 years ago, they were still using like clipboards and stuff because they were old school. The other thing that I always found interesting was so when you cover high school athletes in an area day to day. And it only kind of works if you cover a small or like a mid size region. I would not infrequently talk to college coaches on the phone. And it it was generally for lower level college, junior colleges, that sort of thing. And I did really find it interesting because the number one thing that those folks are usually looking to find out from a neutral observer is not athletic stuff. It's like makeup things. Because, if you're a junior college coach, you're generally looking at someone who like, has some skills, but has some grade concerns, off the field concerns, whatever it might be. And, the coach is gonna say what's best for the player. And if you talk to the player and their family, they're going to say what they want you to hear. But it would always be interesting. And it's funny because, you also have like, the kid. So you want the kid to get the best opportunity. So it's like a balancing act between saying, okay, what can I say that will help this kid potentially get an opportunity to go to a D2 school, an NAIA school, and get an opportunity and education he won't otherwise have, but also being honest with this coach. And that's something I honestly think about from time to time, because that job that I had, 20 years ago, does not exist as much anymore because there's fewer and fewer, impartial regional news outlets. And I just kind of wonder, A, about whether those students are getting opportunities, and B, whether a lot of those schools and coaches end up kind of wasting their time now because they don't get that neutral insight before they bring a kid in and they realize like, oh, actually his high school coach, when he said, oh, I think he can work through his problems, was not giving us the full story.
Yeah, that's a good point. And on your point about the like scouting at high schools and stuff, it is true that like it's not like as formal of a thing as you'd think it'd be. Like I remember I grew up in Wolfboro, New Hampshire, and there's a school there, Brewster Academy, which is generally one of like the top 5 high school or prep school basketball programs in the country every year, and that's the case. I think they're number 2 in the polls right now this year. And I remember like 10 years ago when I would either go to the games or I did work for the school like in some capacity. You would just be there and you'd see like Bill Self. I remember just sitting over in the corner by himself. It wasn't like there was a security detail around him. It wasn't like people were glued to him. He was just kind of hanging out in a windbreaker. It didn't even have Kansas on the windbreaker. He was just watching. And then he got up and he left. And I remember I went to one of the restaurants in town right after just to get food, and he was there too, like by himself, just eating. And then he went off into the night, right? And I remember seeing Coach Calipari in the same kind of context. And it was always surprising to me. Like you'd think it'd be a big production or song and dance when people of those magnitude are coming to the school to watch the players, and in many cases, it's really not.
I think it's also interesting how little of a player those guys also have to watch a lot of times to make a determination. And I know that that can sound bad, be like, oh, Bill Self only watched 5 minutes of action. How can Bill Self has been right more often than not. And I would always think that was interesting because you could have, it's a big showcase, and Calipari shows up for, a few minutes of one game to see a player, and then he goes somewhere else. Then he comes back and watches a few more minutes. And, a lot of the bulk of that kind of scouting job is done by their assistants. But it's also something like I don't know what they see. I'm not the basketball mind that any of those guys are, but I think it's very interesting to see how they can determine just on a couple plays about like whether this guy's got it, both from a talent standpoint and from like a makeup standpoint. I'm assuming.
Well, what's interesting thing is I think that's unique to sports like basketball, where it doesn't take very long to know, right? But like baseball, for instance, I think is something that maybe is more of a larger sample size. And I just have one example where I remember when I was younger, I used to go to Portland Sea Dogs games a lot, and with my uncle. And I remember like one summer we went to see, I don't know, maybe even like upwards of like 10 of them. And it was when Hanley Ramirez was there. And he was always bad, or it wasn't bad, but like we would go, like he's like never was hitting home runs. He was striking out a lot. He wasn't doing, like, I never left super impressed by Hanley Ramirez, even though, I mean, what was I, like 14, 15? And my uncle is a big baseball guy. And he actually, I mean, he's friends with former MLB umpires. He befriends a lot of the scouts that go to these minors games because he goes to like every Fisher Cats game. And one of the games we were sitting next to a scout, I believe, and my uncle asked him like, "What's so great about Hanley Ramirez? Like, I've come here, like I've seen him like 10 or 15 times, and I've never seen anything." And he was like, "Well, I've seen him upwards of like 120 times." He's like, "I've been sent to watch this kid play like almost like a full season's worth of baseball games, and if you watch him as much as I have, then you'd understand." And maybe I think with baseball prospects, maybe you got to watch them for longer periods of time maybe than basketball, where you watch for 1 second, you're like, that guy's good, like he's got it.
We should.
Have I ever told you my? Have I ever told? I might have even done it in a previous episode. My memory stinks. Have I ever told you my Donovan Mitchell story?
Yeah, that's fine. I was gonna say let's hold Portland Sea Dogs for future things, because I have a couple of Portland Sea Dogs stories. I actually covered
stories.
them that summer a little bit at the Portland Press Herald. So no, what's your Donovan Mitchell story?
As I was saying, when I was working at Brewster Academy, I was doing like weird stuff. Like it was like substitute teaching and bus driving. And the bus driving was like, yes, driving the bus like to and from the airport sometimes, but sometimes it was like driving my Corolla to like bring someone somewhere. And one time, and this was back like 2013 or so, they sent me to Connecticut to pick up some kid that was going to be on the basketball team. So I drove to Canterbury, which was like a 4-something hour drive in my little Corolla, picked up Donovan Mitchell, who obviously, I think he was a sophomore at the time, had no idea who he was. And he just sat in my passenger seat, and I drove all the way from Canterbury School in Connecticut back to Wolfboro with Donovan Mitchell, talked to him the whole time. He was super cool. He said that, I remember him saying like he didn't even like basketball. His dream was to be a New York Mets shortstop because I think his dad either played baseball or whatever. And he said that he was playing baseball at Canterbury School, and then like the summer before his sophomore year, a coach convinced him to try basketball, and they had him in a scrimmage in a game against the varsity, which was all like seniors, and he said he put up like 50-something points. So the coach said that he should pursue basketball, not baseball. And then somehow Brewster got word of it and then brought him over there. And then, yeah, he was in a backcourt with Devontae Graham. I think Thomas Robinson and Mitch McGary were also on that team. They went like 42-0. And Donovan Mitchell was ridiculous in high school at Brewster. I mean, it was as you can imagine. But yeah, it was a crazy thing looking back on it. Like he just sat in my Corolla for 4 hours, just shooting the breeze about nothing with some weird white dude from New Hampshire.
That's great. Yeah, that's another topic we should have for Behind the Keyboard, is just how the high schools, the elite high schools, and just if you're good, they find you. But yeah, that's something.
Yeah, they didn't send a limo for Donovan Mitchell. They sent a dude in his Corolla.
All right. Anything else you wanna add? Any asteroid takes or anything that you want to send us off with?
No, I did. I think I saw that NASA came out and adjusted the math and said there's no longer any threat of the asteroid hitting Earth, which is a shame. I think we're rooting for it to some degree, but maybe next time.
Yeah, because the thing that I heard is that it wasn't like it was a situation where they like conceivably could have been able to evacuate the area where they thought, or there's also a lot of water in the
Yeah,
in the
well,
in the in the southern hemisphere. But I thought like that would be an interesting kind of like humanity moment.
well, and again, I think after the episode, they shot the chances up to 3-something%, which was like 1 in 23, which is like, again, can
No,
you? I
three
think,
percent is one. Isn't that 1 in 33?
yeah, something like that, 1 in 33. Yeah, but like, good odds. Like, and again, if it was a 1 in 33 chance that like a planet-killing asteroid was coming, I can't even imagine what the news coverage would be, how people would be acting. Um, do we have the ability to knock that thing off course? Like, I don't know. I really did want to find out. I wanted to see that thing play out and then like land harmlessly in a desert if we couldn't block it, but too bad. I root for the chaos.
Well, we'll have to find a new way to come up with our universal takes. But we wish Logan and his family a healthy recuperation. For Dakota, my name is Ben. This has been the NPC Sports Podcast. Join us next week, and thanks for listening.